Hi, thanks for joining. I'm Varsha, and this podcast is aimed at helping us all age with dignity. In this episode, we need to talk, the conversation every family puts off. I think we can probably all think back to a time when our parents had to meet with us and have the talk, or maybe some of you are doing that with your children now too. It was probably a whole bunch of topics that needed to be addressed on the things that we were going to face as our life unfolded in front of us. Well, now the tables are turned, and we as adult children have to have the conversation with our parents. The conversation now is about end of life choices. And just as there was no golden handbook for new parents, there's no one size fits all for this conversation. I mean, just think of the different factors we need to take into consideration. First of all, what's the age of your parents? If your parents are in their 50s or 60s, that's a very different conversation from one with your parents in their 90s. If your parents are already encountering any long term health considerations, that's going to be a subject that you need to address. What is the emotional and mental capacity of your parents to have this conversation? For that matter, what's your mental capacity to really navigate this conversation to all the topics that need to be covered? And who's at the table? Are you an only child? Do you have siblings? Should they be involved? Do your parents have siblings and should they be part of this conversation? Are there other loved ones that you want to bring in, whether it's at the start when you're having this conversation or once some decisions have already been made? And then, of course, the big one today is location. For those who are first generation immigrants, you probably left your parents behind in your homeland. Or did they come here and they're living with you in Montreal? Or you're at the other side. You've raised your children and they've left Montreal to other parts of Canada or other parts of the world. So, how close are you to your parents? Are you, in terms of proximity, are you able to get around the kitchen table to have this conversation? Or is this going to be something that you're going to have to do by video call or phone call? All of these need to be taken into consideration as we start to address this conversation that we have to have with our parents. And there's something about first and second generation immigrants. We just don't give thought to end of life choices. We might consider a will, but anything else in terms of long term care just somehow is not part of our psyche. Um, it's when you compare to born and bred Canadians, I found a different story. Their approach to aging, long term care, death, and dying was very different. And as I started to dig into this, my first takeaway was that this was because of education. Somewhere along the line, they're taught about palliative care and residences and end of life choices. And then I realized that my sister, my brother, we're all born and brought up here. We're all fully educated here. We never learned any of that. I never heard anything about palliative care. Um, so I was trying to figure this out and researching and talking to people. And at one point, I was talking to my sister, and I think we kind of fell on a different perspective to this whole thing. You see, our parents came here in the 60s, and like some of you listeners or your parents may have come in the 60s and 70s when the propensity to return back to the homeland was not that easy, right? I mean, getting flights, first of all, there weren't that many flights to go back. It was seen as something of a luxury for many families. Was quite expensive to do that trip home. Didn't have the technologies that we have today. We didn't have free calls for long distance calls. We didn't have video phone calls. We didn't have cameras that we can install in homes and watch from a different country. So the reality that they faced was very different. And I think those who came in the 60s and 70s probably also, when they left their homeland, they were probably thinking, I'm not coming back. Or if I do, it's going to be sometime in the future, maybe when I've got children and they're all grown up. So the approach that our parents took at that time was really focused on the future, of course, but the future of their families, the future of having children, raising children, and preparing them for life here. They weren't giving any thought to their own end of life. And when their parents passed or their grandparents passed, they were sitting here in Canada. The witness to the passing of their loved ones just was a very remote experience. They didn't they were not part of the conversation when the aging started. They weren't part of the conversation when life choices needed to be made, and they certainly were not there during the end of life phases. Maybe they got there in time for a funeral. I think most of the people that were here at that time experienced it after the fact. And maybe the biggest contribution was sending money back home to help defray some of the costs. So what I've discovered is I think it's really not a question of education, but lived experience. And if we look at those that are here in Canada for multiple generations, they've had that opportunity to live the end of life care for their parents, grandparents, great grandparents. We somehow just think, oh, you know what? It'll be taken care of. Who's going to take care of it? What are they going to take care of? If we've not experienced end of life care, it's not in our psyche, it's not in our mind naturally. If we don't have that in our mind, how are we going to know what the options are available to us? If we don't know what those options are, how do we know what our personal preferences are? And if we don't know what our personal preferences are, how are we going to communicate that to the ones that we're entrusting to act on it on our behalf? And of course, if they don't know, how can they act with our wishes in mind when we're gone, or perhaps in some ways even worse, when we're still around but unable to communicate it, right? So part of this is about awareness, and I will be helping through the podcast series to bring people to the table that will share insights into all of these options for us so we can learn and grow together. For today, I'd like us to start the conversation. And to help us with that, I've got a couple of guests joining us, and I chuckle when I think of them as guests because I've known them for a long, long time. They're friends of the family. But they're going to bring very different perspectives on their experiences with end of life care. And hopefully, we'll all be able to learn from that. I'd like to introduce and welcome Amar Mooney and Pragna Patel. Thank you for taking the time and welcome to Aging with Dignity. So, maybe for context, you can help our listeners understand a little bit about your family background, your makeup, what does your family consist of? And maybe Pragna, ladies first. Let's start
Sure,
with you.
sure. Well, I'm born and raised here in Montreal. I am first generation born and raised. My parents have immigrated here from India. My mom arrived here when she was about 11 years old, so she got to grow up here and, did all her schooling and everything here. My dad only immigrated here after they had gotten married. So originally, my grandparents had immigrated here back in the 70s. So just living through, I guess for them, it was a lot of living through learning, learning about all of the assimilating. That's what it is, right? So assimilating from the Indian culture, getting used to the Canadian culture, learning about all the laws and all the things that they had to do around here. So yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool. I didn't know all of that actually. And Amr, your family makeup.
Yeah, so it's a similar story actually. My parents they emigrated here in the late '60s, and yeah, they were always here. My mother and father were married in India. They were born and raised there, and they came in. Let's see, my mom was roughly in her 20s, and my dad was late 20s. So basically, that's when they came over, and yeah, they had a journey, trying to figure things out, trying to make sense of it all, obviously, and so that's them, and they obviously stayed here their whole lives.
Right. So the first question is really a double hitter here that I've got. So I guess the question that we're here to talk about today are end of life choices that we need to make and end of life care that we need to make. And are you aware of your parents' wishes? And if you are, how did that conversation come about? And let's start over here.
So end of care wishes, um, I am slightly aware of, but not fully. The conversation actually came up when I was in my 20s. So I remember the first time that this happened. My parents had gone out. They didn't tell anybody where they were going. They went out for an appointment. They came home and, I started grilling them. I wanted to know where they were. Where were you? What time did you leave? Why didn't you come home? How come you didn't tell us? And they caught me off guard when, as I was grilling them, they were like, we went to the notary. And I'm like, why did you need to go to the notary? And I'm in my 20s, early 20s at this point. I had no idea what was happening. and they told me that they wanted to go and start doing a will. And I was completely caught off guard. I had no idea where this was coming from. And this was definitely the first time that something like this had ever come up. Um, it was more of a shock. The first thing that came up was, okay, are you sick? Is something going on? Why do you have to do a will? Why are these things coming up now? So that was my first introduction to, yeah,
In your 20s,
in
that's
my 20s.
pretty
So
young.
you
Yeah.
can imagine that was not fun to deal with.
No, I'm
But
sure it
yeah,
must have been a shock, but at
yeah,
least you got this. They started having that conversation with you.
yes,
How about
yes.
you, Amr?
So for me, it's a little bit of a different story. The conversation actually came about. I'm going to give you a bit of a tale of two cities because I've lived it twice now. Once where I was thrown into it, and the other time where we had more of a chance to have a bit of a ramp up. The first conversation was actually with my dad. My mom and dad were visiting, or they were actually on vacation in India, and they landed. 4 days later, I think the trip was too much for my dad's heart. He was 86 at the time, and he had a heart attack. And so I get the call in the middle of the night, saying, "Hey, you got to come to India now." And so that's what it was. And we went through that whole process. Mom stayed behind longer than was originally planned. She stayed with her brothers and sisters another 4 or 5 months. And then post that, she came back and came back bent in half. I think the trauma of having, lived with your husband for 60 years, being married and all of this, and then, they're suddenly gone. There was a physical element to the emotional element, right? So then that's when the discussion started coming up, especially with regards to, okay, well, what do we do now? Because A, you're alone, and B, you can't, you're bent in half. You can't really take care of yourself, right? So that was like a trying to navigate through that, especially with Indian parents that aren't necessarily the most expressive or willing to talk, right? And then the flip, I'll give you the other journey where this came up. It was with my in-laws. Essentially, my mother got hit with a bad case of dementia. What accelerated the process was that my father-in-law, he had a triple bypass scheduled. Essentially, this is like it was his second, the third, I think it was. And so the doctors were like, "You've got these other complications." And honestly, we're giving you at best a 50-50. And that broke her, right? So then something snapped, and then her mind just kind of went. And that's where we started having the conversations with both. So again, a few years apart, at least it wasn't all at the same time. But, one we had a chance to gradually ease into a little bit more, and the other just kind of thrown into. And yeah, handled in two different ways, basically. But that's what brought it.
Did your dad ever talk or your mom ever talk about a will or anything earlier than this happening?
Not one word.
So really, your first introduction was in India with your dad in the hospital.
Yep, that's it. That's it. I mean, to be fair, he couldn't talk, and obviously my mom was too much in grief, so she couldn't talk either. I did find out that there was a will. I didn't know it was ever done, and so they had that, and so that I had to pour through when I came back.
I guess both of you have mentioned a will, whether it was raised and it was a pivotal part of the conversation, and yours where it was never mentioned. And I think we've got your answer already that there was never any discussion, at least until your mother came back, is my understanding, any discussion about end of life or elderly care. Right. So, how about you? When your mom and dad talked to you about the will in your 20s, was there ever a follow up to that? Like, did they ever start talking about, well, if we're in a condition, we want to go to a residence or any of that conversation happen?
At the time, no, that did not happen. I think I was still trying to get over the shock of why do you even need a will in the first place?
It's interesting you had to get over
I
that
had
shock.
to get over that shock.
Yeah.
I'm sure for them, they were going through so many things. And actually, recently, I did find out, I'm like, what prompted you to even get to getting a will at that point? And they were like, I think they were both turning 50s or something like that in the time. And they had a couple of incidents where people close to them had passed away suddenly. And so for them, and they were also going on a new business adventure at that point. So they were like, I think it's time. Like, this is just a turning point that they needed to do this. And it's something that they spoke about. But
It's interesting because I was going to ask the question actually of what brought about the conversation, right? Because there's usually some sort of life event or health issue that we encounter? And so your parents probably hit an age milestone, it sounds like.
That's what it sounded like. And again, this was all very recent. I didn't know this and I didn't ask this
Oh,
when
okay. You just found it
I just
recently.
found out very recently, like
Okay.
now.
Right.
So yes,
So
it
you
was an
understand
age.
that there's a will.
hmm
There, it sounds like there has not been a discussion on end of life choices
I have
yet.
tried, not yet, not yet. But I have been trying to poke them a little bit more just to try to get them to start thinking about it because I know these things are important and it's not to scare them and I'm trying not to scare myself either, but it is something that I feel like needs to be discussed and they need to figure out what they want, right?
And I think the fear is there because we don't know. As soon as we
Exactly.
start having this conversation, you can rest easy and say, okay, we've dealt with it. We know what to do in case of A, B, or C. And hopefully your mom and dad are watching this podcast and they're
I
going to
hope
start
so.
to think about this too. And it's a very important conversation. I mean, me and my parents, we never had this,
hmm
right? Um, Amr, for you, was there a life event or a health scare or something? What brought on the conversation? I know you were in India, so we understand that obviously that was a health scare for you or a life event. When you came back and you started to have the conversations with your mom and your in-laws even. It seems like all of these were around health issues. Did you ever get to the point of having a conversation about not just a will, but what are their wishes for end of life care, long-term care?
Yep, that's actually a great question. So again, as mentioned earlier, when she came back, she was bent in half and could not get around. So we tried it out because she said, "I'll be fine. I'll be fine. It's not a big deal, right? And leave me alone. It'll be fine." We did. She didn't want to make any changes, and rightfully so, right? You had enough of an upheaval losing your husband, so didn't want to make any changes. Okay, mom, no problem. Then came the calls. So basically, I was working in the West Island, living in the South Shore, but then I get a call. The first one I remember, she's like, "I fell," and I was like, "What do you mean you fell?" And she's like, "Yeah, I fell. I crawled over and I can't get up." So then here I am in the West Island. Obviously, I left work to Rieta. Then came another call and another call. I can't get out of bed. I can't do this. So then it was evident. Oh, gee, the physical situation, the health has changed dramatically, and we do need to have this conversation. And the ultimate irony of it, again, snippets. We never had a full comprehensive conversation on how we move forward, but that was a catalyst essentially, right? Like as in, okay, well, we have to do something because this isn't working. I don't like you being stuck and not being able to get up or take care of yourself or make yourself food. That doesn't work, right? So that's what brought it on, and it took a lot. I'd say that even just to get anything to move forward, didn't want it. You know what I mean? Like as in as you get older, I think that's the other element that you have to recognize that there is a super resistance to lack of change. You don't want anything different. You don't want, irrespective of on a logical level, you realize I can't keep going like this. It's the emotional that's stronger that kind of keeps you tied, saying, no, it's going to stay the way it is. It'll be fine. And you almost delude yourself, right? So yeah, that's what brought on the conversation. And it was through many conversations actually that we came to a little bit of a semblance of, okay, that's what I want. We're still not there yet, but
Yeah.
that's where it was.
I think that's the key too, Amr, that and we start the conversation, but it's a conversation. It has to continue. And that resistance to change is a great point too, because I mean, some people are just resistant to change anyway. But I think we all know from our education and classes and stuff that most people are resistant to change because of the unknown. They don't know what's coming beyond it. So the more we talk and we clarify it, it gets rid of that fog, right? And then we become more at comfort with saying, okay, if A happens, I'd like A, B, and C. And if X happens, I'd like A and B. So we can have that conversation. I had shared earlier a little bit of an aha moment that I had about my mom and dad when they came here. Their experience with their parents and grandparents passing was a remote experience, as I said. Um, for dad, I was 5 when my grandfather passed, and it was a phone call because I took the call. Um, and it was the first time I'd seen my dad cry. But that was how we got news. My mom, it was through letters. My grandmother on my father's side, it was telegrams and letters. So, at that time, we weren't able to go back and forth as easily as I said earlier. What their participation really was sending a check, right, to help defray some of the costs that were being incurred. Their focus was here on the family they had, us as children, and our future. They certainly weren't thinking about their, and they had a will at some point, but never that conversation of what else. So I'm just curious if you've had, Pragna, you've said that your grandmother was here, your
Mhm.
grandparents were here. Um, did you know if your mom ever had or your dad has ever had those conversations with their parents? Have you been part of that? Is your family, is this something that you guys all talk about?
I would say it's not something that we all talk about. There is that segregation between the parents and the elders keeping their stuff separate from the kids. And I place myself in the kids, right? What When my dad's parents both passed away, they both passed away in India. So my dad had to, kind of run over there and figure everything out there. So that I know is very different, and dealing with everything in India and how they deal with things there, quite different from what it is here in Montreal, right? Or in North
Did he
America.
get, sorry to cut you, did he get there in time to see them through the last weeks, or was he there just at the funeral point?
He was there at just the funeral points. Yes, with my grandmother. Um, I believe he had gotten the call and he got onto a plane, and he just didn't make it on time. So there was that from what I remember. So no, he was only there for the funeral time. So I don't think they ever had that conversation. And again, Amr, you had mentioned this too, right? The elder generation, they just don't talk about these things, right? So I don't think they ever did talk about it with my dad. With my mom, my grandmother is still alive. My grandfather just passed about 2-3 years ago now, and with him as well, I feel like they spoke about it with my grandfather. So my mom had spoken about it with her dad, but again, very like it's type of conversation that just keeps going. I don't think anything concrete was ever said.
I think it's interesting because that's probably a very typical first, second generation
Hmm.
story, right? That um, we don't talk about it because we're apart. How do you get it? The one time that you're on the phone, you're going to talk about them dying, right? Like, and we're now today we've got the technologies of WhatsApp and free calls, so we're able to connect a lot more. But even then, you're not around the table. How do you start to have those conversations? Not easy, right? How about you, Amber? Did you experience your grandparents passing, and
No,
was there any
well, I mean,
conversation?
honestly, to your point, it was a phone call. Um, in both cases, on my dad's side and my mom's side, multiple phone calls, obviously, because they didn't all die at once. But the point is, yeah, that's it. And they weren't involved. And at the time, it was too challenging to hop on a plane and make it over. It didn't work. So for them, I think, um, my parents were exposed to the end of life of their parents, and B, they couldn't even be there for the actual funeral points, which was even worse, right? So it's they just, like you said, never had the opportunity to work through it themselves. In the case of my wife, on the other hand, that's where I guess it was different. So my wife, she's half Greek, half Egyptian, and she's her parents both came here in their late teens, essentially, and her grandparents, on her mother's side, they came, obviously. The On her father's side, he came by himself, basically, to just try do a better life thing on his own. So, right, like, they were exposed. So she was exposed to actually watching the grandparents age and needing to leave their home to an apartment, needing to leave the apartment to like an assisted care, needing to go to a hospital, like the stages, right? And then watching that just kind of unfold in and of itself. But yeah, so I think she had a very different exposure and upbringing, and kind of had those kinds of questions or thoughts in her head, right? So it made for like help for me actually to kind of try to open those discussions with my parents. But yeah, that's essentially what that landed.
It's interesting because we all do have very different experiences, and you're even within your extended family are learning, right? And we can learn from each other. And that's what we need to take away from this. Amr, you have an older sister
Yeah.
in Toronto. Um, how was she involved in the conversations? It's an interesting dynamics because in South Asian culture, um, she's the older one, but you're the boy. She's away, you're here. Um, did those dynamics figure into any of the conversations that you're having with your mom now?
Yeah, I would say yes. And that I think is it's interesting in and of itself because okay, let's kind of pick that apart. As is, we're super different in terms of our personalities, right? Like, I would classify myself as a lot more anal, a lot more like, okay, it's got to fit in a box, it's got to work, I've got to have everything ticked off, and like I live off of lists. That's me, right? My sister's a lot more free flowing and just go with the flow. It's just, it'll be fine. The universe will take care of itself. Kind of a and fair, like it's. Um, and both are totally valid.
Yeah.
So that being said, you start at two different places. Now you introduce the space, even with Toronto not being far, the space that also adds other elements of like miscommunication. And then having the exposure in terms of timeline, because you need to have the face to face time with the parent to have the conversations. You can't do that over a video call or a phone call. So you're absolutely correct. It brought a lot of headbutting in terms of just approaches and how to deal and how, hey, we should do this or this is the timeline. Um, and I found it challenging. I'll be fully transparent, very challenging. So yeah, it wasn't smooth. It wasn't smooth. I'll be honest. But we found a way to work through it in the end. It just took a lot longer than I would have liked.
Yeah, and I guess if we start earlier, we've had similar challenges in our family, right? How do you get through some of these discussions when you're not all together in the same spot? Very, very interesting dynamics start to come out in that.
And your
space.
timeline element,
And the
timeline is
timeline.
critical.
Yeah.
Like I never thought about the fact that the best time to have these conversations is when you're in your pristine health.
Absolutely.
Like full mentally, full physically, and then you can kind of start thinking about, because it's a process even for yourself, right? Like nobody knows what they really want because they don't like thinking about their own dying and their own decline, because at the end of the day, we just want to do our own thing as people, right? So our parents are no different. So it's true. It takes time.
That's great. Pragna, your situation is a little bit different, but a little bit the same. You're both here in Montreal. You have a younger brother. Again, Indian background. We've got some of the same norms that kind of kick in. So you're the elder one. He's the boy.
Yeah.
Does that figure into how you have the discussions? Was your brother part of the where we went to get a will discussion at the same time, or how did that happen for
You know
you?
what? That's very interesting. I actually don't remember.
Does he know now?
He does know now. I have brought up that with him, and we have our own side conversations. So my brother and I were very close. We have side conversations about this all the time. Together with my parents, I don't believe it's happened because the times that I have spoken to them, it's been my parents and myself only. I really can't remember about the will if he was there or not. There was a time though where my brother took charge. So this was back in 2017, I believe, 2017 or 2018. My dad was taken to the hospital. He ended up having a heart attack, and I was not there for that. I was out of town, so that was extremely difficult. And my brother he I don't even know what he did. He just took care of it. He stepped in, he took care of it. He had to. And I think at that point, that's when we were like, okay, we gotta figure stuff out, because if one of us is not here, what are we gonna do? How are we gonna move forward? And I think that was another pivotal point that we had gone through as well. So we try to have these conversations as often, I guess, as we can. But again, it's still not something that we do on a regular.
That's really insightful, by the way, that you're able to have those conversations, and you're considerably younger than I am, and I'm dealing with those issues still today with my mom and with my dad recently. We've talked about the will, which seems to be a pretty standard point of conversation. I'm curious for both of you. Were there discussions of other things? We've talked a little bit about end of life. Some of you are starting to have those conversations. But what about other things like legal documents that need to be addressed, financial situation, transitioning to a residence if that's needed? Are any of that on the table in your discussions?
I recently did have a conversation about that with my parents as well. In terms of legalities, I believe they kind of are navigating all of that and they're trying to figure that out. So that might be already in place. Resident stuff, where do you want to live? Do you want to live with me? Do you want to not live with me? Do you want to go back to India and, kind of hang out there? That I think they're still on the fence with, and they'll probably do that, take those decisions as they come. Um, Other random things that have come up. I specifically asked as well if you're ever in the hospital and something happens, like who is your what's the term that they use? Power of attorney, like all of that. Like who does it automatically go to? Did you write somebody else's name down? You don't have to tell me these things, but just so you know, like we're not thrown under the bus, and so we know also
Yeah,
how to
you should
navigate
know.
these things,
Yeah,
right?
who's stepping in? Who's yeah.
Exactly. So that type of conversation has kind of happened, and they have disclosed a couple of things, but not. I still feel like they're also navigating it, so they haven't fully gotten there yet.
Yeah, but they're thinking about it,
They're
right?
thinking
And
about
that's the
it.
key.
Yes.
And we'll be having many different guests coming on the podcast to address a lot of those issues because until you're in the midst of it, you don't know.
Yep.
Right. And as you've both said, if we haven't experienced it before, you just don't know what you need to think of. So part of one of the main reasons for the podcast is to share this information with people so that we know, okay, do we need a living power of attorney? Have I got my finances in order for home care? Am I aware of the tax credits that are available? All of these things need to be addressed at some point, and they don't all have to be done in the same conversation,
Of course
right?
not.
And
Right.
and as our parents evolve, they need to too. But you don't want to be found in the situation that all of a sudden they're not able to talk or communicate and haven't shared their wishes with somebody. So, how about yourself, Amber?
So I'm actually going to take a step back, and it's interesting because you're right. None of this was kind of set up in advance. There was no power of attorney. There was forget the element of like who's going to be doing what, right? I think the power of attorney, it's something that I realize it's almost a mandatory when a parent passes away or someone's incapacitated. In India when I went, right? You kind of have conversations because here my dad had passed away, and then I had to go back and kind of deal with stuff while my mom was going to stay, right? So the immediate statement was, "Oh, okay, it's no problem. You have a power of attorney," and I was like, "What? What do you mean?" And so my cousins were like, "Obviously, you have this, right?" Because for them, it's clear
Yeah, interesting.
they'd understood and they knew that these are the things you have to do
Cousins in India?
in India, correct, right? Not here,
Yeah.
in India. So then it was a bit of a, oh, wait a second, I don't have that, right? So we my mom being there, we tried I did get a power of attorney from a attorney there in India, but it had no weight here. Anyways, the point is, that's where when she came back, that's one of the first things that we did from a legality element. If I flip it, what's interesting, our system had no idea before on my wife's experience. So again, just to kind of recap, my father-in-law passed away and my mother-in-law has dementia. Our system is actually built for handing over authority or power between husband and spouse, or husband and wife, or wife and husband, whatever. That's no problem. As soon as you have one spouse that's passed away and the other one that's mentally incapacitated, right? Even just getting that process moving, because basically there's a whole like a 9 month or it takes about a year to get any kind of control over finances because she's incapacitated. Oh well, wait, are you guys allowed to do this? And there's all these questions and why is this happening, right?
Yeah.
All this stuff. So that legal element is just, oh my goodness, such a huge burden because of the fact you don't have a mentally capable spouse that would normally get this, right? Like normally it doesn't get hit at the same time. And so unless all the elements are done in advance, it's kind of hard to get that sorted. Your other question about the residences, that was another interesting one. Both parents, like both sets of parents, mine and my in-laws, we tried having a conversation when it was again starting to be a bit dicey, right? And it was a hard conversation, and they both hated it. They hated the idea. No, we're not doing it. Like I will die in this house. I've been in this house for my whole life. There's no way. So it's yeah, it is. it's kind of eye-opening because you don't think about you just want to make it easy, and then you have this veil in front of your eyes or these glasses on and say, okay, well, I just want to make it safe. In if I go back to the case of my mom, she's falling, she's not able to get out of bed, she can't make, this element. Okay, well, what's the easiest option? Let me get her out of the house, put her into residence. Like, just that's the safest. I don't want her to like the thought of being stuck on the floor is like it's not right. As an Indian kid, you're like, I can't stomach that, right? But if it doesn't align with their wishes, that supersedes. So it's almost like you have to realize that there's give and take, and in the end, residences were no go for either of them.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's interesting. You covered a lot of ground there. The living power of attorney and the homologation process that you go through. I'm actually going to have a couple of notaries on to walk us through that because there are some really good, solid learnings that I had in the last few months on that alone. My situation was somewhat similar. That we never had a discussion about residences. Dad was going to stay in his home. He never ever, I mean, mom wanted to move many, many times in their life together.
Mhm.
I think once they bought the house here in Montreal, that's it. Dad was that one house, one done, and we're done. Um, after mom was diagnosed and started to lose her motor skills, I did take them finally, convince them to come and see a residence. And they came with an open mind, but they came back saying no, that's not what they wanted. I mean, they had the option of autonomous living at the top, and then as mom's dementia progressed, she could have been moved down to the dementia floor. I was trying to convince dad that he'd only have to take the elevator to go up and down, but they came back home and they said no. Then there was an opportunity for a condo that was connected to the building, and they would have the ability of having that red pull cord. So if one of you fall, the nurse is able to come. Again, they considered it. It was a condo, an outright purchase. Came back home, and then I think they talked about it. Say they told me they talked about it. And they said we want to stay home. And much to your story as well, Amr, I had to sit with them and say, okay, I have to respect their wishes. Right? It's their life too. So we said, okay, if you're going to stay in your home, now we have to adapt your home. Right? There's changes we have to make because mom is now using a walker. She'll soon be in a wheelchair. Adjustments that we had to make around in terms of the bathroom and living conditions and stuff. So we did that. And then in dad's final stages, when he came back from the hospital, I asked him again, do you want to consider that we start to shift you to a residence? And he was very clear, no. So I said, okay, dad, I'm going to respect your wishes, but here's the thing. As long as you and mom are safe in this house, we'll respect your wishes. The minute you're no longer safe and it's compromised, you lose that choice. I will take that away from you and we will have to find an alternate. And dad understood and he said, yes, I understand that. But in his heart, he always was one to say, I'm going to pass in my home.
So I want to flip it to you. Do you have these conversations with your siblings? Because you have two siblings, right?
I do. I have
one here, one away.
That's right. I've got a sister in Victoria. My brother is here in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu. It was interesting because the discussion around a will was the first thing that we did. My parents did, and I was part of that. And then I came back. I'd been living in England. And I came back, and for some reason, the concept. I guess we started talking about the will again, and so we pulled it out, and it was old. Like, so that's another thing we learned is that you need to look at that every time to time because decisions my parents had made when they originally built that will was my brother was a child. I was already in university. So our phases of life were different. Now we're all adults. We're all set. We're all on our way. And your focus as parents is different. So my mom and dad took a look at it. They made the changes that they wanted to. And then once mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, we had another conversation where I was part of it, instrumental because I brought the notary there. And that's where we learned about a living power of attorney in addition to the will. And the living power of attorney, the notary turned around to dad when we were just about to sign and said, do you realize what you're doing? It was mom, dad, and myself. He said, do you realize what you're doing? Because you are giving your daughter the right to pack you up and put you somewhere tomorrow. And dad looked at me and went, you're going to do that? And I said, if you don't behave. So you have to know who you're giving those powers to.
Of course.
And so we well understood that we had that. And in the end, it turned out to be so timely because Mom was declining. Dad fell a couple of times, and I was able to take care of all of their banking. I was able to. Dad liked to go to the bank, so at first I went to the bank, and then I got online banking going and made things a little more efficient. So, Asha and Sandeep were part of the discussion along the way, but much to the dynamics that you shared and some of the who leads what conversation. I'm here. I live 5 minutes away from mom and dad. I became the go-to person. Asha and Sandeep participated as much as they could. And yeah. So the sibling stuff is, I do think that we need to all come to the table.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to share a story because as we're talking about this, I'm remembering that a few weeks ago I had a chat with a colleague of mine. We were just talking what's happening on the weekend, and he just turned around and said, "Oh, we're having a family meeting." Um, as if he was saying, "Oh, we're just going to the cottage, or we're going skiing, or we're going golfing." He's like, "We're having a family meeting." I'm like, "Oh, what's your family meeting about?" He said, "Well, my grandmother's in her 90s, and my parents are in their 60s and 70s, and we need to get things in order about end of life care for my grandmother. We need to talk about the estate." And I must have been sitting there gobsmacked, my mouth wide open, going, "What? Like we never had family meetings, right? That was never part of our dynamics." It sounds like you've had a little bit of that you might have been pushing.
A little bit.
It's interesting, and I think it's because, as I was saying earlier, people who are born and bred here and have lived multiple generations, they've seen the end of life through their loved ones and have it in their psyche now to have this conversation. And I think that's where we as first and second generation immigrants need to get to. It's really, really important. I have a question for you. You have three children of your own, two of whom are young adults now.
Yeah.
Have you and Elena started the conversation with them?
No. I had to put no, not at all. Ironically, I mean, we've had, let's say, casual conversations around the couch about, hey, I'd like this or I'd like that or whatever. And I think our plan is as well to, I think, as our health declines, because it's inevitable, right? Like I think we will force those discussions a little more. I think we've heard the basics with them, like just not necessarily in a formal manner, but just organically having kind of little discussions here and there. But no, we haven't had, let's say, end of life. Okay, let's say I'm being held alive just by some machine, right? Like, what do you pull the plug? I've had those with my wife, and she's had them with me, but never with the kids. So it's funny how the sins repeat themselves, right? Like, but you're right. It's something we do have in mind to do. So
you've got a takeaway action point.
Yeah.
Okay. So I had, I won't call it an aha moment, but maybe it's an insight that I learned just recently. As I've shared on the earlier podcast, our family lost our father at the end of last fall. You both were part of his last weeks with us. And as we were getting the funeral preparations together, we called the people that we needed to. Everything got organized. We knew where it was going to happen, who was going to be involved, what the ceremony and the rites were going to be. And for some reason that night, I just decided to pull Dad's will out again and quietly sitting in the room, started to read it. And as I was rereading it, and I thought I knew his wishes pretty well. We had a couple of weeks of having to try and absorb what was happening. And as I read it, my eyes went to the final 3-4 words of a sentence that said he wanted his funeral rites to be performed by a Hindu priest. A Hindu priest. Oh my God. Because we had made all the arrangements with an elder in the community, Lalit Uncle, that you both know, he's very knowledgeable, had arranged everything for us, but he's not a Hindu priest. So it was late at night and I called him up, and I have to say Uncle was amazing. No ego at all. He, in fact, called the mandir, called the temple, arranged with the pundit to come. The funeral was as my dad would have wished it to happen. But I tell you, if I had not read that night and we had proceeded with Lalit Uncle doing the ceremony, it would have been wonderful. But if I had read it the day after, I know me, I would never have forgiven myself for that. What I learned from that was if you have a specific wish, put it in writing. You may talk to your children, they may not remember at the time. If it's in writing, preferably a legal document, because then if there's anybody contesting what's happening, you have legal recourse.
Right.
But by having it in writing, it gives somebody a place to go to and say, okay, this is what I want. And if you have specific wishes, you need to make them known. But it might also be that, hey, I just want a simple funeral. It doesn't really matter. What is simple and small to you? Is small 5 people, 50 people, 500 people? It's all relative, right? And what is simple? A simple casket, no ceremony, outdoor ceremony, indoor ceremony. So write these things down, because if you really don't care what happens, then it doesn't matter, right? But if you have specific wishes, you need to communicate them so that the folks who are responsible for it afterwards, when you're not here, or if it's something that has to be done in terms of end of life care and you're unable to communicate, you touched on it, they would know, right? So this is my one little takeaway from the experiences we went through. I'd like to turn over to both of you as a final point. Do you have any learnings? You're both at somewhat different stages of the process with your parents and with your family and children. Any learnings or insights that you'd like to share with the listeners? Let's start. Okay, let's start with Pranila.
Any insights? I think the biggest thing is just ripping that band-aid off and having the conversation with your parents. I think that's the biggest thing, just being open to receiving, and it's fine if they don't have anything to say, but just planting that seed and keeping that conversation going, as you had mentioned, because this is not a one-time thing, right? I think that's the biggest takeaway. Just start putting the seed in there, start talking to them, and start figuring out the things that they want, so everyone can be happy at the end. I think that's the biggest thing that I take away from all of this. Yeah.
I'd echo your statement in terms of trying to figure out what the individual wants. So I find it interesting. Neither on my side with the wills that my parents had, and as well on my in-law side with the wills that they have, neither of them had wishes like that listed. However, with my father-in-law, the 3 daughters, because they have 3 girls, my wife and 2 sisters, right? So the 3 girls, they sat down with him and they took notes. They basically went through everything and they kind of said, okay, all those key points about the funeral, where you want to be buried, what do you want, A to Z, in terms of the whole ceremony, songs sung or not, like memories, slideshows. They went through every like painstaking detail and they got it right. That being said, I'd probably even say this, like the takeaway for me, you're not going to get it perfect. You touched on the fact that you would have felt guilt. You're right. You'll feel guilt. You always feel like as a child, I didn't do enough, or I didn't do exactly the way it was. You won't get it perfect, and just do the best you can with the information you have. But it's okay. It's okay that it's not perfect in terms of how you see it unfolding or how they see it unfolding. You just have to find a happy medium and just be sure that whatever you did the best you could. And you really just kind of showed up, right? And the rest, they'll just fall into place.
That's really key, actually. You just need to show up, start talking. Yeah. Well, thank you both. You've been so generous with your shared journeys and so many good insights for even, around the table we've all learned, and hopefully our listeners have too. I do encourage listeners to check out the care toolkit for this episode. There's some reference points and links to resources that you might be able to use. And there's some action items to get you started in your conversations with your families, much like these two have done with their respective families. Thank you both once again.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everything you've heard today, just real talk. It's just our personal stories, experiences, and honest opinions. This podcast isn't providing legal, medical, financial, or therapeutic advice. And no, listening doesn't make me or my guests your lawyer, doctor, financial advisor, or therapist. The guests and I are here to share stories, spark ideas, and hopefully give you something to think about. When it comes to the big decisions, make sure you do your homework or check in with the experts who know your situation best. We're here to keep the conversation going. You're the one in the driver's seat. Thanks for tuning in. Please join us for our episode next week as we discuss the differences between caregiving and care providing. Until next time, reminding us all to age gracefully and live vibrantly.